Hey guys, so nice to see you here. So I'm Alexander Sternlicht, if we haven't already met, and I sort of oversee all things under 30 on the editorial side at Forbes. And one of the things that we love to do in that is the unconventional. So when we put this panel together, we were really thinking about the unconventional. I am joined here on stage by an architect and a venture capitalist, which is not necessarily what you would think of when you would think of a traditional panel. So Brandon invests in things that optimize human life, often in the fitness and wearable space, including Aura, which just hit a $2.5 billion valuation, which is amazing. And Ralf is designing spaces that foster government and social impact collaboration, like the Belfast Zoo in Northern Ireland. So I want to start by asking you guys what, the title of the panel is Optimizing Human Life. How do you optimize human life in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I can keep this pretty short. The way that we understand, I would say, health broadly is that the longevity of your life is going to break down into 4 or 5 things: how you eat, sleep, move, and manage your mental health. And so what we try and do is invest in solutions that go directly to helping people eat better, move more, sleep better, and better manage their health. Yeah, pretty simple.
Yeah, and so I run a multidisciplinary design studio. Quite simple for us, really. It's placemaking. So biodiversity, accessibility, safe spaces, all of the kind of stuff that makes our city great, right? So that underlined with economic, social underpinning makes happy people. Happy people can make sustainable choices and live a better life.
And so the thing that we're talking about today is sustainability, and we are looking at climate mega disasters, major socioeconomic inequality. How in your work do you guys factor these things into what you're doing?
Yeah, I would, I was talking to somebody yesterday, and one of the things that came up is sometimes when you have a problem, like, oh, we overeat, the solution is to sell you something that to consume more, to consume less.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think one of the things we try and recognize at TXV is that there's somewhat of a little bit of a paradox to encourage consumption to consume less. And that's just the name of the game. Unfortunately, we live in a capitalist economy, and until we have a major sort of paradigm shifting, come back to reality, let's not live beyond our means moment as a globe, that's not really going to change.
Yeah, I think for us it's cutting across silos. So it's reframing issues within cities, right? So we're going to tackle climate, we've got to tackle well-being, we've got to tackle like the everyday things that we want to change in our city, and make stuff contextually relevant, right, for the people that live there. So it's quite simple. How do you use tourism to tackle climate? How do you improve the quality of health by reimagining infrastructure? So for us, it's break down the silos and reimagine things through joined up thinking.
So sometimes I feel like, there's the over-design and the over-optimization of things in our contemporary society. Like, can you go for a run without tracking it? Did you even actually go for a run? I think the answer is probably no. So I'd love for you guys to talk about how can humans continue to be humans and not sort of like these weird avatars where we've gamified our whole entire life. Where do you strike that balance? Brandon, maybe you can start with this one.
Yeah, that's tough. To return it back to sort of the original thesis of how we frame the world, I just try and break it down into like mentally just being healthy. Just avoiding negative emotions, realizing that I'm in control of my perspective, not allowing myself to get dragged on by whatever it is. Venture is a game of like dealing with the constant problems that come up. And so just giving a healthy emotional distance. We have a rule in my fund, we don't talk before 10 a.m. So it has to be something pretty serious. Yeah. I'm not an early riser. And so Marcus, my business partner, knows that if you want to get me at my best, it's just not going to be at 7 a.m. It allows me to sleep in. Move, it allows me to get some work in too. Yeah.
And some fun.
And some fun in as well.
Where to start? So I'm actually going to flip it away. So more around thinking about a city scale for smart technology. So look, smart cities is the way we need to go, but is it a smart bin first and then people after? Probably not. So I think it's making sure that we make the data in our cities work for us and the problems within our area. And I think we need this technology. We need better data, because otherwise we can't create better decisions within policy making. But yeah, it should be problems first, and then the smart tech and follows.
So one of the really interesting things that I found on your website, Ralph, is this Future Foil project, which is basically a visually and architecturally stunning suicide prevention mechanism on a bridge in Northern Ireland. So we've talked a lot about the, bringing out the best qualities in humans, but can you talk a little bit about designing to prevent the darkest inclinations of humanity?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the first areas that I actually started working on, suicide prevention. And I think a relevant fact for us guys here is, suicide is one of the top 4 killers in men under 30, yeah? So how can we create sustainable environments if we've got people, literally dying by suicide within our cities? And my expertise obviously is in public space, right? So, if you die by suicide in public space, it's a media act, right? It's there, it attracts more other vulnerable people. So our approach to it is quite simple. Reimagine what a city can be, and that's not about putting fences and barriers on bridges. It's about creating animation and positivity and smart technologies that can respond to people if they're at a river's edge or on a bridge. But also making sure when you design stuff in cities, it's civically owned. So these ideas have to come from communities within those areas so that you get culturally relevant interventions. But to continue that just briefly, I think another big thing, you sit in front of a health minister and tell them, invest in the country's largest tourism sculpture that would also act as a prevention barrier. Put money in tourism, you'll save lives. Or tell an infrastructure minister, invest in suicide and you'll have safer roads, less closures. It's a tough gig. So that's why fundamentally to tackle issues like suicide prevention, we really need to think bigger.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, there's a statistic that 1 in 8 Americans over the age of 16 are on antidepressants. Yeah. Like 1 in 8
That's
people.
That's a lot.
That you walk down the street in New York City, probably more in New York City,
Yep.
are on some
For
sort
sure.
of medicated intervention for their emotional health. And, it's very clear that, just in my personal, we weren't really designed to live like this. We were designed to live in intentional communities where people care about each other, where we connect with each other in meaningful ways, not through screens. And so to an earlier question that you had, maybe if we stop, accelerating the algorithms to the point where they become super addictive, right? And we start saying that, hey, we have a direct correlation because suicide spiked in 2008 with the introduction of like and share, we might be able to unwind some of the things that are happening right now. And so we often try and make positive arguments, as Ralph just did, but there are some negative interventions that probably should be made.
Yeah, so as someone in the VC tech ecosystem, what algorithms do you think are getting us, thinking about Americans, getting 1 in 8 Americans on antidepressants? Like, what do you find to be most harmful about technology in society these days?
I think it's the way in which it's started to crowd out normal human interaction, in the way in which we tend to think, and I'm very, very guilty of this myself, in the way in which you like, oh, what am I going to do today? Oh, what are people going to respond on social media? Like, oh, how is this picture going to affect, whatever my perspective is. It's unfortunately something that we all start to do with social media. But, and to that, and what we try and do at TXV is really democratize access, which is the counter argument to the wearables, to your own information, and then to empower you to make better decisions.
Yeah, so your work at TXV, so one of the portfolio companies I was looking that you invested in is called Future, which is like an amazing coaching, personalized activity app, but it cost $150 a month to use. How do you democratize that personal wellness? Do you democratize that personal wellness?
So there are I should say that Americans spend $100 billion a year trying to get fit. Of those, 80%
Slide.
fail. So $80 billion goes out the door. All those gym memberships that people don't use in April, May, June, and so forth is like part of that $80 billion. And so Future has the highest retention out of any app. People use Future more than they use Peloton.
Okay.
I would hope that the pricing would reduce, but what we're thinking about Future, we're not indexing against people going to the gym more. We're indexing against personal training.
Okay.
And so the argument that Future made is like, hey, you don't have $450 on top of $300 to have a personal trader at Equinox to hold you accountable. Mm-hmm. Why don't you just spend $150 for someone that's actually going to keep you more accountable, and to the point of human connection that we were making earlier. Sometimes what the data has revealed in the Future is that people talk to their Future coaches more than they talk to their friends.
Yeah, and so two things about you guys that are, switching gears here that are pretty similar is that you guys are both focused on like hyper local. Yeah. By nature of being an architect, obviously you're focused on specific physical spaces, and Brandon, you're really into Texas. How does that hyper local focus translate into a global mindset?
Yeah, and look, I think you should always start hyperlocal. I think one of our biggest challenges for genuinely getting to sustainable cities is we're not culturally or contextually relevant all the time. Quick example is we have a factory in Belfast, so between the UK and Ireland, kind of post-Brexit is in that kind of space. It's the most deprived neighbourhood in the UK, right? And essentially, I've sat with a single mother that's deciding, can she afford to put the heat on, or can she spend that money on the meal for her and her kid that night, right? So if people are in that context, in that situation, how can they think about wider climate issues, or if that energy for the heat is renewable? They can't do it, right? So I think winding in narratives to places is really relevant. To teach people in the day-to-day lives and at a neighborhood level what they can do to make better sustainable choices. Now, once you do that and you get the narrative right, then you can scale out the principles and the methodologies behind that and apply that contextually to other places.
We are a Texas firm. It's called TXV. Every founder that we invest in gets a pair of Tecovas boots, also made in Austin. It's very important to us that we are rooted in the community that we live in, just across life. And we love Texas. But Texas is the 10th largest economy. If it was a standalone state, it'd be the 10th or 11th largest economy by GDP in the world. And so we are global enough.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, and what do you guys think, like, being in Africa and thinking about this question of optimizing human life? What have you learned from your trip here?
As an African American, as an African descended person in America, number one, thank you for welcoming me to the motherland, which is the comment that I keep getting on Instagram from other African Americans in America. I think for me, it's just been a reminder that, oftentimes we think about things within American social, cultural, and political context. We tend to monolithize American culture, and globalization doesn't help, obviate that feeling when you go somewhere else, when you fly 24 hours and, people are talking to you about the Memphis Grizzlies, but it reminds me that, we are really shared connections. And so it's just great to get that perspective, be welcomed, and know that, $150 per month subscription may not work in areas of sub-Saharan Africa, so we might need to invest in different solutions to empower different types of people.
Yeah, I think, well, what a beautiful place. I mean, it's hard not to get absorbed, isn't it? But it's not for me to sit here and say what's contextually relevant for Africa or Botswana. But I think talking to all of you over the last few days, we've all got the same issues, right? And, we can adapt things, we can be agile, and we can reprofile our approach to stuff for wherever we are in the world. But we all have the same issues. So I think fundamentally what we need to start doing is basically how do we share learnings across ourselves and across places so that we can genuinely transform the sustainable cities we need right away?
Yeah. And I know that we're running out of time here, so I want to ask you guys, in closing, you're both very young, you've both been quite successful, you're both members of the under 30 list. And you're operating in these really crowded fields, architecture, it's as old as humankind, and venture capital. So what advice do you have for people here who are looking to break into spaces like yours and really create niches?
I think it's quite simple. Just start. So much of our time we just ponder, don't we? And we think, should we do this? Should we not do this? I mean, just get on, give it a go. I don't have an Irish accent, if anyone can tell that. I'm from London. But there's a reason I set up in Belfast, yeah? Architecture, as you said, saturated market in London. And, some of the nooks and crannies and the cities that are really crying out for stuff don't need to be in the capitals of the world. So that's how I try to stand out.
Yeah, I try and keep it simple. I believe that Marcus and we're both men of faith. We're given a mission to democratize access to venture capital, especially within Texas, especially for African Americans who control less than 1% of the alternative assets in America, right? It's just abysmal. And so that mission turned into our vision of what TXV was supposed to be, which turned into our platform, which turned into our network, which ideally will turn into our net worth.
Awesome. That's a great note to end on. Thank you, Ralf and Brandon. This is awesome.
Thanks, Alex.